You felt it. Maybe last week. Maybe yesterday. You walked into the grocery store, a store you've been shopping at for years, and something stopped you cold. You reached for something ordinary. Eggs, bread, chicken. And for just a second, you did a double take at the price tag. Because it didn't make sense. It wasn't a luxury item. It wasn't some imported specialty product. It was just food. The kind of food your parents bought without thinking twice. The kind of food you grew up assuming would always just be there, affordable, available, normal. But it's not normal anymore. And nobody is telling you why. They'll blame supply chains. They'll blame fuel costs. They'll blame weather. And yes, those things play a role. But here's what they're not telling you: the real reason your grocery bill is quietly climbing has nothing to do with any of that. The land your food grows on? It's being bought systematically, strategically, and the people buying it are not farmers. By the end of this video, you're going to understand something that most people will never know, a shift so fundamental that it will affect every single meal you eat for the rest of your life. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Stay with me, because what I'm about to show you goes deeper than food. It goes all the way down to who controls your survival. Let me ask you something. When you imagine who owns the farmland in this country, the vast fields where your corn, wheat, soybeans, and vegetables actually come from, who do you picture? A farmer, right? Maybe an older man. A family that's worked the same land for 3 generations. Maybe struggling financially, but still out there. Still growing things. That image is decades out of date. And clinging to it is costing you money right now. Here's what the data actually shows. Family-owned farms are disappearing at a rate that should be headline news every single day. When a family farmer retires, or passes away, or faces a bad year and can't recover, the land doesn't go to another farmer. It goes to a buyer with deep pockets. Very deep pockets. And here's the part that nobody talks about: these buyers aren't just rich individuals. They're institutions, funds, corporate entities with names that don't appear on any product label you've ever seen. You think the free market is protecting your food supply. You think competition between grocery chains keeps prices honest. You think the government has regulations preventing monopoly control of essential food production. You think you're protected. You're not. Let me show you what's actually been happening. Because the consolidation of farmland ownership in the United States, and across the Western world, is one of the most significant economic shifts of the last 30 years. And it has been almost completely invisible to the average person. Why invisible? Because it happens slowly, one farm at a time, one county at a time, one state at a time. No single sale makes headlines. But zoom out, and the picture is staggering. The top 100 private landowners in the United States now control more acreage than entire states. Let that land on you for a second. And it's not slowing down. It's accelerating, because once you understand why powerful entities want to own farmland, not to farm it, but to own it, you'll understand why this is only going to intensify. But here's the problem: the why is more alarming than the what. And that's where we're going next. Let's talk about who is actually buying American farmland. And I want to be precise here, because this isn't a conspiracy theory. This is documented. This is public record. This is money following a strategy. The first category is institutional investment funds, pension funds, hedge funds, private equity. These entities discovered something about farmland that fundamentally changed their investment calculus. Farmland doesn't crash. It almost never goes down in value, and it produces a return every single year from lease income paid by the farmers who still work it, but no longer own it. Think about that structure for a moment. You buy the land. A farmer pays you rent to grow crops on your land. You collect that rent like clockwork, and the land itself appreciates in value every year. To an investment fund managing billions of dollars, that is essentially a perfect asset. But it gets more interesting, and a lot more consequential. The second category of buyers is technology companies and their billionaire founders, not buying farmland to grow food, buying it to control it, to experiment on it, to potentially transition it toward new agricultural models, lab-grown proteins, vertical farming, precision fermentation, models where the technology, not the soil, is the value driver. And the third category, the one that has generated the most political heat, is foreign sovereign entities and foreign-linked investment groups. These buyers represent geopolitical strategies that operate on a completely different time horizon than quarterly earnings. They're thinking in decades, in centuries, even. When a foreign government-linked entity buys land near a U.S. military installation, or purchases tens of thousands of acres in a single transaction, that's not an investment. That's a chess move. Now, here's what all three of these buyer categories have in common, and this is the insight most people miss. None of them need to make money from farming. None of them need the land to be productive tomorrow. They're playing a long game based on a single, powerful assumption, that in a world of growing population, climate instability, and finite arable land, whoever controls the land, controls the food. And whoever controls the food, controls everything that depends on it. Global arable land per person has been shrinking for decades. There is no new farmland being created. The supply is fixed, and the competition for it is intensifying every year. The farmers who remain, many of them are now tenants on land their families owned for generations, paying rent to a corporation in a distant city, locked into lease agreements that dictate what they grow, what inputs they use, and what price they sell at. Nobody talks about this, and there's a reason for that, but I'll get to that in a minute. First, let me explain exactly how this drives up what you pay at the checkout line, because that's where this gets very personal. To understand why farmland consolidation directly hits your wallet, you need to understand how food pricing actually works, because most people think they do, and they have it almost completely backwards. Most people think the price of food is driven primarily by the cost of producing it: seeds, labor, fuel, fertilizer, input costs. And those things do matter, but they're not the dominant force. The dominant force in food pricing is market power. Who controls supply, who sets terms, and who has alternatives, and who doesn't? Let's trace the chain. A crop grows on a farm. That farmer sells it to a processor or a distributor. The processor turns it into the product you recognize: the cereal, the bread, the meat. The distributor moves it to the retailer. The retailer sells it to you. At each step of that chain, there used to be competition. Multiple processors competing for the same crop. Multiple distributors competing for shelf space. Multiple retailers competing for your dollar. Here's what's happened to that chain over the last 30 years. In most major agricultural categories, beef, pork, chicken, grains, 4 or fewer companies now control the majority of processing capacity. 4 companies controlling what you eat. When there are 4 buyers for a crop, instead of 40, the farmer has almost no negotiating power. They take the price offered, or they lose everything. And when there are 4 processors instead of 40, the retailers have less leverage. And when retailers have less leverage, you pay more. But here's the second layer, and this is the one that's relatively new, and far more dangerous. When investment funds own the land, they introduce a completely different pricing logic. A traditional farmer needs to produce and sell to survive. Their incentive is to grow as much as possible and sell it at whatever the market will bear. An investment fund's incentive is return on asset. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the highest return comes not from maximizing production, but from restricting it, or from influencing the terms under which production happens. When enough land is controlled by entities that don't depend on that land for their livelihood, the entire incentive structure of food production shifts. And the shift benefits the landowner, not the consumer. Add to this the consolidation of seed companies, fertilizer suppliers, and agricultural equipment manufacturers, each now dominated by a tiny number of massive corporations, and what you have is a food system that is increasingly controlled from the top down. The independent farmer sitting at the center of that system? They're becoming a contractor, executing decisions made elsewhere, using inputs priced by entities with market power, selling into channels controlled by a small number of buyers. And every squeeze along that chain ends up as a number on your receipt. There's one more mechanism that most people never consider. Land is now a financial instrument. It is bought, sold, and valued using financial models. And when financial models drive land prices up, which they have, dramatically, the cost of entry for new farmers becomes impossible. A young person who wants to start a farm today faces land prices that have increased by hundreds of percent in a single generation. They cannot compete with institutional capital, so they don't start. The farming population ages, the supply of independent growers shrinks, and corporate control deepens. It's a self-reinforcing loop, and it's been running for decades. But here's where something genuinely important enters the picture, because this is not inevitable. There are pressure points. There are things that can change, and there are things you can do right now that actually matter. I want to be honest with you here, because the temptation in a video like this is to give you a tidy, 10-step list that makes you feel empowered and ends everything neatly. I'm not going to do that. The structural forces at work here, the consolidation, the capital, the political lobbying, they're enormous. No individual consumer decision is going to reverse them. Anyone who tells you otherwise is selling you comfort, not truth. But here's what is also true: systems run on participation. And your participation, where it goes, what it funds, matters more than you've been told. First, understand the difference between corporate agriculture and local production chains. This is not a lifestyle preference. It is a meaningful economic choice. When you spend money at a farmer's market, a CSA, a local co-op, that money stays in a local supply chain. It does not flow upward into a fund that views your food as a return on investment. Every dollar you redirect has a multiplier effect. Local food economies, when they reach critical mass, create enough demand to support more local producers, which means more land stays in the hands of actual farmers. This isn't nostalgia. Local food systems have been shown to create significantly more economic activity per dollar spent than equivalent spending in consolidated national supply chains. The math actually works. Second, become informed at the policy level. Farmland consolidation is an issue where legislation makes an enormous difference. There are states that have laws restricting corporate ownership of agricultural land, and those states have meaningfully different land ownership patterns. The policy lever is real. But here's the problem: most people have no idea this is even a policy issue. They don't know who their state agricultural commissioner is. They don't know what bills are in committee. That information gap is not an accident. Third, and this is the one that feels small but compounds fast, talk about this. The reason farmland consolidation has proceeded largely without public resistance is that it's invisible. It doesn't look like anything. It's just paperwork, quiet transactions, line items in investment portfolios. Visibility is oxygen for accountability. When people know about a problem, it becomes politically costly to ignore. When they don't know, it runs on autopilot. Fourth, if you have any investment exposure, pension, 401k, IRA, it's worth knowing whether those funds hold positions in agricultural REITs or land investment vehicles. You may be inadvertently funding the very consolidation that's driving up your grocery bill. Some funds now offer screened alternatives. It's not for everyone, but knowing is always better than not knowing. The most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be a passive participant in a system that depends on your passivity. Knowledge is not enough, but without it, nothing else is possible. I need to tell you something. Because everything we've talked about so far, the grocery bill, the farmland, the consolidation, that's actually just the surface layer. The deeper issue isn't food. It's the logic that's being applied to food. The same entities that are buying farmland are also buying water rights, and timberland, and mineral rights, and the infrastructure through which digital information flows. There is a pattern here that goes beyond any one asset class. It is the systematic acquisition of things that people cannot survive without, things that have no substitute, things where, if you control enough of the supply, you no longer have to compete, you simply set terms. Economists have a phrase for this. They call it toll booth economics. You don't need to build the best product, you just need to own the road that everyone has to use. Then you charge the toll. Food is a toll booth. Water is a toll booth. Energy is a toll booth. The internet is becoming a toll booth. And the people building these toll booths understand exactly what they're doing, even if the people paying the tolls do not. Water deserves special attention here, because the connection between land ownership and water rights is direct, often legally inseparable, and even less visible to the public than land consolidation itself. In many jurisdictions, owning land means owning the water that flows under it or through it. As climate patterns shift and water scarcity increases in agricultural regions, water rights are becoming more valuable than the land itself. Entities buying farmland now are often buying future water control. And here's the thing nobody is prepared for: what happens to food prices when the water used to grow food is priced by financial markets instead of managed as a public resource? We may find out soon. There's also a technology dimension to this that is just beginning to unfold. Precision agriculture, the use of sensors, AI, and data to optimize crop production, is extraordinary technology. It can meaningfully increase yields and reduce waste. But the data generated by that technology, data about soil conditions, crop health, yield predictions, climate patterns, is extraordinarily valuable. And the companies providing the technology own the data, which means the most detailed, accurate picture of global food production capacity is increasingly held privately by a small number of tech platforms. Information about food supply is power over food markets. And that power is concentrating at the same time, in the same direction, as land and water ownership. I'm not telling you this to frighten you. I'm telling you because these patterns, once you can see them, become possible to navigate. The person who understands the system has options that the person who doesn't understand it simply cannot see. Which brings me to the final piece of this: the payoff. The thing you now have that most people watching their grocery bill climb will never have. Let me tell you what you actually have now. What this video has given you that goes beyond information. Most people who feel the pain of rising food prices respond with frustration and helplessness. They blame vague forces, inflation, the economy, politicians, and then adapt their behavior marginally and move on. They are passengers. You are no longer a passenger. You understand the mechanism, and that is not a small thing. You now know that what you pay for food is not the result of impersonal market forces beyond anyone's control. It is the downstream consequence of deliberate decisions made by identifiable entities with specific interests that are not aligned with yours. That knowledge changes how you read the news. It changes how you interpret policy debates. It changes what you pay attention to and what you dismiss. It makes you a more accurate observer of economic reality. The people who profit from concentration of food system ownership depend on the majority of consumers remaining economically passive and informationally isolated. You are neither of those things now. You know who owns this. You know what are their incentives. You know price increases upstream, past the store, past the distributor, past the processor, all the way to the land and the water and the financial logic that now governs them. You know food networks are not merely a preference but a meaningful structural alternative. You know that farmland protection laws exist and can be strengthened. You know the conversation happening in the background of your grocery store visit is a much larger conversation about who controls essential resources in an era of growing scarcity. That conversation is going to intensify over the next decade. And you are now equipped to participate in it, not as a spectator, as someone who understands what's actually being decided. The price on the tag at the grocery store is not just a number. It is a signal. It is the visible surface of an enormous invisible system. And now you can read it. They bought the land quietly. They're counting on you staying quiet too. That's the one part of this you can change. Starting today.